Hey guys, we're back. Today we're going to start a new teaching, and we've been talking all this time about the covenant. And we're going to start a new teaching today about the mystery of the covenant and what our place in this covenant is. We're going to find out that from the beginning we have had a place in this covenant. We're not catching Yahweh off guard here. This was always the plan. Okay. And so anyway, we're going to talk about that. We're going to change things up a little bit today. I think just in analyzing how our videos are doing on YouTube, I think maybe we're going to try and shorten them down a little bit. I know it's hard to sit down for a long teaching, and I see that I can tell that people are watching part of it and then coming back and watching part of it and coming back and watching part of it. And so anyway, we're going to try and shorten it down, maybe try and keep it around an hour long this time. And we're going to slow down a little bit. We're going to get into more teaching, more of a deep teaching. I'm kind of blowing right by a lot of stuff as we've been teaching this stuff because I felt like we needed to get a lot of information out there really quick. But I think now we're at a place where we can kind of slow down and breathe a little bit and kind of smell the roses. You know, when we see something, and teach on it a little bit. So anyway, having said that, I hope this video finds everybody well. A lot of crazy stuff going on. And again, a few things this week. We've been fighting, trying to figure out why our audio is not coming out right. It's hard to understand what I'm saying, what I'm talking about sometimes. And anyway, my son just happened to come over the other morning. He looked and he said, "Well, you get your microphone up on backwards." And so anyway, hopefully we turn the microphone around. Maybe our audio is going to improve a little bit here. But anyway, having said that, we're going to get into this teaching. This teaching is the mystery of the covenant. All right. And this new covenant, there's a mystery in it, and people don't understand this covenant. And so we're going to go back to understand this covenant. We have to go back to the beginning, and we have to look at this covenant and understand not only the new covenant. Before we can understand that new covenant, we have to understand the old covenants. And so anyway, having said that, we're just going to get into this deal. All my life growing up, I've heard preachers teach that a covenant is basically a contract. I've heard people say that. Preachers, just in life, I've heard people compare a covenant to a contract. I have taught that a covenant is a contract, and I was wrong. So anyway, when I started doing this study, the Ruach, the Spirit, told me, before you can make this video, you better check into this a little bit. And he kind of inspired me to go back and look at a covenant versus a contract. And what I found out, they are not the same. And much of the confusion about a covenant and the covenant that we're in is that it is not a contract. And there are differences between a covenant and a contract. So I looked in Wikipedia, I looked in Webster's dictionary, and I could see that there was a difference, but it was one of them deals where we would have had to gone through pages of stuff really to get to the meat of the difference in them. And the clearest, in a nutshell, explanation of a covenant and a contract and the differences in them I found on a legal website. And I looked at 4 or 5 of them. They're all saying the exact same thing. But anyway, I chose one that I believe is going to be, get everything right here, is going to be the most clearest, shortest definition I could find. And so we're going to go now. I got way too much stuff up here. Okay, we're going to look just real quick here at the difference between a covenant and a contract. And this is an Incorporated Zone website. They give explanations, legal explanations on law blogs, business contracts, corporations, definitions, law, and marketing. And this is basically just a page explaining the difference between a covenant versus a contract. Okay. And so anyway, a contract is a legally binding agreement that can include covenants. You can have covenants inside of a contract, but they are not the same. A contractual, they're called contractual covenants. Whereas a religious or moral covenant is a spiritual agreement. Okay. Contract is a legal agreement between the parties versus a covenant that is a promise or a pledge. Okay. So we're already starting to see some difference. Contract can be dissolved or terminated, whereas a covenant requires that the promising party would always uphold his or her promise at all time. So let's say in a contract, somebody breaches that contract, it voids that contract. It terminates the contract. That is not the case in a covenant. If somebody breaches that covenant, it's still in play. It does not end. And just because somebody on one side of that covenant breaches it does not release the other party from keeping that covenant. So anyway, it goes on perpetually. We'll see that in the next verse, or later on in this, requires that the promising party uphold his or her promise at all time. A contract will have a finite time period, whereas a covenant can be a perpetual promise that cannot be broken or canceled. Okay, that is huge. Unless you stipulate a time period in a covenant, it is eternal. It goes on forever. Okay. One example of that is a marriage covenant, right? Do you, Bill, take Jane to be your lawful wedded wife until death do you part? Okay, you have just put a time limit on that covenant. And there's a reason for that. You know, if Bill and Jane get married and they walk out of the church and, you know, Bill gets struck by lightning and Jane is standing at the church steps as a widow, if there was not a time limit on that, Jane could never remarry, right? You might have an 18-year-old widow who, for the rest of her life, because of that covenant agreement, would not be allowed to remarry legally without breaking that covenant. So there is a stipulation in there about till death do you part. However, let me get out of here. However, the covenant we're going to talk about today is a perpetual covenant. It never goes away. And just because one side or the other breaches that covenant does not void that covenant. It never ends. And so even if we breach it and then we go, oh, we shouldn't have done that, and we come back, that covenant is still there. And so anyway, the same thing. Just because we breach it doesn't mean that Yahweh is going to turn his back on it, because a covenant, both parties are required to keep that covenant eternally. If there's not a time limit on it, they're both required to keep it forever. And just because one side or the other walks away from that covenant does not void that covenant. Okay, we need to understand that. And so anyway, that's something that we've got to understand before we get into this covenant teaching, is that it is eternal. It never goes away. And, you know, people ask me, well, how do you know? Paul, we're under this new covenant now. The Torah was nailed to the cross. Why do you think it wasn't? Well, first of all, there's not a prophet anywhere in the Old Testament or any writing anywhere that says when these Gentiles come back in the end, we're going to read about that today, that they're going to not keep, that a remnant of them are going to come back and keep these instructions. That is the new covenant. In Jeremiah 31:33, that is the new covenant. Ezekiel 36:26, that is the new covenant. They're going to return and want to keep these instructions. So how do I know? If I never read a single word that Paul wrote, but I understood that, in 2 Peter 3:2, it's telling us, before you understand what Paul's saying, you've got to know what the prophet said. If you don't understand what the prophet said, Peter said, you're going to twist Paul's words to your own destruction. If I never read a single word that Paul said, and I knew that his word was true, I would know he was not saying that the Torah was nailed to the cross, because not a single place do we find that in the Old Testament. Nowhere does he say that. And if somehow Paul met with Elohim and Elohim told him, you know what, I know what I told the prophets, but we're going to change it. Okay, we're going to totally change this deal. At that point, Yahweh would be the one breaching that covenant, right? If he turned his back on what he had said before, he would be the one breaching that covenant. And what we're going to find out, he is never the one that breaches that covenant. It is always man that breaches it, time and time and time again. In fact, you're going to see, from Noah to Abram, it doesn't take them long before they totally turn their back on the covenant given to Noah, right? Adam, I don't know how long it took him, but he breached that covenant. And, it doesn't take thousands of years to turn your back on a covenant. We do it pretty quick. We forget quickly. We're shadows and dust. We're vapors and wind. We forget quick. From throughout our generations, we forget stuff really fast. And so we turn away from stuff really fast. In Abram's case, Noah was still alive. And they had already turned their back hardcore on the covenant to Noah, way before Noah died, even. Of course, he lived a long time. But we're going to find out some stuff today about this covenant. And so anyway, having kind of laid that out, we had to define what a covenant is. It is not a contract that can be voided because of a breach. And so it's the good old days when I didn't have to wear these things. I can't walk by a pair of glasses without them getting dirty. But anyway, okay, here we go. We're going to talk about this covenant. So we're going to go to our eSword, and we're just going to kind of look. Let's start in Genesis 9, and we're just going to start looking at this covenant. And we have to understand, I'm not going to go clear back to Adam. Adam was given a covenant. Adam didn't keep that covenant. He broke that covenant, and he got kicked out of the garden for doing it. Eve broke that covenant. She brought a lot of misery on herself for breaking that covenant. Mankind has never been the same for breaking that covenant. And we find out when these covenants get broke, it changes mankind. So anyway, we're going to start in 9:12. We're just kind of going to go through some of these. And Yahweh said, "This is a token of the covenant between you and me and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations." This is a perpetual covenant. So just because men turn their back and turn away from that covenant does not void that covenant. Okay. Just because, Nimrod and all the stuff that's about to happen does not void the covenant that he made with Noah. And what we're going to find out is Yah didn't turn away from it. He never does. When he makes a covenant and he says it's eternal, he truly means it's eternal. Yah is not a man that he would lie. Does Yah change? No, he does not change. Men change. So anyway, this will be the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations, forever. Never goes away. I do set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be for a token or a covenant, a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant. He's never going to forget it, which is between me and you, and every living creature and all flesh, and water shall no more become a flood and destroy all flesh. That is a perpetual covenant, and we're going to get into that just a little bit with Noah. We'll look at just a few, and then we're going to come back and kind of study them out a little bit. Let's go to Genesis 17:5-8. Neither thou shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee, and I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee. We're going to talk about that. And kings shall come out of thee, and I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant. Okay, once again, this is a covenant. This is not a contract. Just because men walk away from this covenant does not void that covenant. And they walk off and leave Yahweh. They're standing there holding the bag, but he does. He stands right there and holds it, and he will not turn his back on that covenant ever. He says he won't. He's not a liar. And I will give unto thee and thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, and all the land in Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their Elohim. All right. If there's any dispute about who that land belongs to, there it is. Yahweh does not change, and it doesn't go away. So we're going to go 17:19, just kind of look at a few of these everlasting covenants. And Yah said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son, indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. So what he's saying is, we're going to find out that he made a covenant with Abram, but he's telling Abram, okay, not Ishmael, but through Isaac. This covenant is going to go forward through Isaac, not through Ishmael. So anyway, let's look at Exodus 31:16. Exodus 31:16. We're for the children of Israel, okay? I hope everybody watched the video last week, because without understanding the house of Judah and the house of Israel, you will not understand these covenants. Israel and Judah are not the same. Not unless it's in the context of the whole house of Israel. And still, there are distinctly different people in that whole house of Israel. Hopefully, everybody had a chance to watch that. Wherefore, the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout all their generations for a perpetual covenant. Okay, just because men turn their back on that Sabbath does not mean it goes away. He's going to say that throughout time, that will be a sign between him and thee. Just like a rainbow is a sign about the flood, the sign between him and us will be that Sabbath. It's going to be a sign just like that rainbow. And again, just because men turn their back on it does not void. It's not a contract. This is a covenant. It does not go away. And again, we're going to find out that Yah does not change, right? Yahweh does not change. He will always, he's like a rock. He will not move. Men may walk away from it, but Yahweh will never walk away from a covenant when he speaks it. He's not a man that he should lie. Here it is right here. Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations, for it is a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. Right? Perpetual. Just because you quit doing it does not mean it goes away. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, and the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Okay? That Sabbath does not go away. Men can walk away from it. We saw that in the mystery of iniquity, right? There was a great falling away. They turned their back on a truth. Did God turn his back on his truth? No. Men they divorced themselves from a truth. and they turned the mystery of iniquity, right, is the fact that men turned their back on a truth, which they breached a covenant. Is what they did. The great falling away is nothing more than mankind breaching a covenant. Okay. Did Yahweh say, okay, it's broken now, I don't have to, we're not going to keep it anymore? No, he didn't say that. A covenant, both parties are required to keep it all the time, irregardless of whether one side breaches that covenant or not. The other side is still going to keep that covenant. And we'll find out Yahweh is never the one that breaches it, ever. It is always mankind. So now we're going to go to 1 Chronicle 16 and see 13 through 17. Again, if you didn't watch that video last week, you're not going to understand a lot of what we're going to say today. O ye seed of Israel, his servant, and you children of Jacob, his chosen ones. Okay, again, when Jacob's been brought into the mix, all of a sudden you are definitely talking about all 12 tribes. Jacob had 12 sons who became Israel. They were all 12 tribes. And so when Jacob is mentioned, we're talking about all of his descendants, his chosen ones. He is Yahweh, our Elohim. His judgments are in all the earth. Be you mindful always of his covenant, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, even the covenant which he made with Abraham, and his oath to Isaac. So that covenant went to Abraham, and then it went through Abraham to Isaac. We're going to get into a little more depth about that. And hath confirmed the same to Jacob for a Torah, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant. Okay, hopefully you watched the video last week, and then that's going to make more sense. Judah and Jacob are not, or Judah and Israel are not the same thing. So anyway, let's go on. Jeremiah 32:40. Jeremiah 32:40. Okay, here we go again. I will make an everlasting covenant with them that I will. Let's see how far we're going to go. We'll get into it deeper later. I will make an everlasting covenant with them that I will not turn away from. He is never going to be the one to breach this covenant. I will not turn away from them, ever. I'm not a man that I would lie to do them good. That I will not turn away from them to do them good, but I will put my fear in their hearts that they shall not depart from me. So he's going to, if he has to use fear to bring us back into this covenant, he's willing to do that. So now let's go Ezekiel 16. And we're going to go 59 to 62. Okay, 59. Okay. For thus says Yahweh Elohim, I will even deal with these thou hast done, which hath despised the oath in breaking the covenant. You turned your back on the covenant. You despised the covenant, not me, he's saying. Nevertheless, what's he saying? I will remember my covenant. Doesn't go away. He will never turn his back on that covenant. Men, you broke that covenant, but even so, I will remember it. That's what he's saying. I will remember my covenant with you in the days of your youth. Okay, this is pretty cool. I will establish unto thee an everlasting covenant. Okay, so he's not going to turn his back on that covenant. Now, he may end up sweetening the pot for us and making us a better deal, but that does not make that covenant go away. Then thou shalt remember thy ways and be ashamed. you're going to remember, you're going to look back at history of Israel, and you're going to be ashamed at all the things you've done. When thou shalt receive thy sisters and thy elder from the younger, and I will give unto thee for daughters, but not by the covenant. I will establish my covenant with thee, and thou shalt know that I am Yahweh. What he's saying here is, you guys can turn away from that covenant, but I will always remember the covenant. I am not a man that I would lie. You can turn your back on it, but this covenant doesn't go away. Now, he is going to give us a new covenant, which is going to be a better covenant, but it does not delete the covenant that he made. Okay? It's still in play. He did not nail part of that covenant to the cross and say, forget about it. He just made it less painful for us to break that covenant. So anyway, having said that, we're going to go back now, and we're kind of going to go in a little more depth about some of this stuff. We've defined what a covenant is. Now we're going to go back and we're going to follow this covenant and see how our place fits into this covenant. It was always his plan, always from the beginning, that it would go to the Gentiles, the Goyim. This was always in his plan. Okay, guys. We understand the first covenant was given to Adam. Adam broke it. All right. And I don't know how long it took, but probably not a terrible amount of time before Adam broke it and Eve broke it. And consequences came to both of them for breaking it. So anyway, let me get out of there. Okay, we're going to go back and look at this next covenant that was given to Noah. And Elohim blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth. You will dominate this new world. And upon every fowl of the air, and upon all that moveth upon all the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea, and to your hand they will be delivered. You will dominate all the animals on this earth. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. But the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood, therefore shall you not eat. Okay, two things really quick. In the next covenant that he makes, he improves this next covenant when he gives it to Noah. It's a new improved covenant to Moses. It's improved from the one he gave Noah. Right? He always improves it. We're in a new covenant now, going into a new covenant that is improved from the one he gave to Moses. Right? He improves it. Doesn't do away with the original, but he improves it every time. So let's look at this. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat to you, even as the green herb I have given you all things. Okay. There are other writings that go into a lot more detail about this, but I will just say that he definitely clarifies that in the covenant given to Moses, and he names by name every single thing that you can eat, every single thing you cannot eat in the new covenant given to Moses. What does not change, but the flesh of the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall you not eat. You know, they're still talking about that in Acts 15 in the Council of Jerusalem. You cannot eat things strangled with its blood in it. That is all throughout time that you are breaking this covenant by doing that, and it has a high consequence for doing that. That's why they're talking about it in Acts 15. So anyway, and surely your blood of your lives I will require at the hand of every beast. I will require it at the hand of man, and at the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of men. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Whosoever sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For the image of Elohim made he man. Man's created in the image of Elohim, and if one man kills another, that there's a high price. And you if you murder another man. And you be ye fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply therein. And Yahweh spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, And behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. It's going to be a perpetual covenant. And with every living creature that is with you, the fowl, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, from all that go out of the ark to every beast of the earth. And we're going to see that one change in Hosea 2:16-ish. He's going to make a new covenant on behalf of man with these animals. Okay. It's going to change in the millennium, right? We're going to see a difference in this covenant towards the animals on behalf of men. He does it. I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood. Neither shall there be any more a flood to destroy the earth. Okay, let's see how far we're going with that one. That's far enough. We'll stop there. That is a perpetual covenant, guys. And so what we find out, it didn't take men long to do away with this covenant. So before we get into this, I'm not going to teach on it. It's not in the King James, but there's a lot of history that we don't get in the King James. There are other books that we're going to start talking about Abram. And basically Genesis picks up on Abram at about the age of 75 when he makes a covenant with him. Some of these other books, I'm not going to teach on it, but I'm just going to tell you quickly what they say. It gives a lot more detail about Abram's earlier life. He actually, we know, went and lived with Noah for a while. His father, Terah, was a high priest for Nimrod. Okay. And there's a lot of stuff that we're not shown. They're in, some of these other books, Jubilees and Jasher, that tell Nimrod, for example, began to become a giant, it says, and a Nephilim, that somehow or another he began to become a Nephilim. Okay, he was a giant, and somehow, and it does tell, and I can tell that in another, I can't teach it today, but it tells how something from before the flood carried over to allow Nimrod to become there were giants on the earth in those days, and also after, and before the flood, and also afterwards. Nimrod was he began to become a giant after the flood. There was something that was allowed to go past that flood, that Nimrod became a giant. He began to become a giant. Okay, Terah, Abram's father, was a high priest to Nimrod. He was making and selling idols. He was a high priest. Nimrod, one of the seers, had told Nimrod that Terah's son Abram would go on to be the downfall of Nimrod. And so, of course, Nimrod told Terah, hey, your son, we got to get rid of him. At 2 years old, you need to kill your son. Okay, so basically Nimrod, Abram deceived Nimrod and made him believe that he had killed Abram. Okay, and so in these other books, it tells that Abram goes and stays with Noah. And later on in life, he comes back and he tries to persuade his father. He'd stayed with Noah. He knew about Elohim. He tried to persuade his father, look, Nimrod, he might be a giant. He might be everybody's worshiping him. He's not Elohim. He's not a true God. And he's trying to convince his father to leave being the high priest for Nimrod. Well, Nimrod finds out that, number one, Abram is not dead, and number two, he's back. And so there's kind of a showdown between Abram and Nimrod. And so Nimrod shows up and he's kind of starts putting Terah on the hot seat. And, how is it that Abram's still alive? And basically Nimrod said, okay, I'll tell you what, Abram also, they were building a tower. He had a hot furnace himself, and he lit that furnace, and he told Abram, you know, I'll tell you what, you walk into that furnace, and if you don't die, then I'll let you live. And so Abram walked through that fire and walked right out the other side. And it tells the story. And Abram, there were a lot of people watching this showdown, and some people were starting to believe, some of these people who had fallen away from the covenant were beginning to believe Abram, who had spent all this time with Noah, that, maybe this Nimrod, we probably shouldn't be worshiping. There were people falling away from worshiping Nimrod, and one of them was his brother, Haran, Abram's brother. And Haran, after Abram walked through that fire, Haran says, you know what? I'm with Abram. I'm on his side. And so Nebuchadnezzar said, all right, well, you walk through that fire. Well, he walked into the fire and he was immediately consumed and died. But we find out, Genesis kind of picks it up as Abram is 75 years old, and as a covenant is given to him when he heard Yah's voice. And that's kind of how it starts in Genesis. We find out in some of these other books that he heard the voice much earlier. In fact, that at the age of 70, that a covenant was given to him. And I'm not going to teach about that. I just, setting kind of a backstory. If you want to go find out all that information, but we just kind of suddenly pick up with Abram at 75, where there's some history there that we're not familiar with. And we're going to go on to find out Abram's grandson, Esau, would be the one. It says that Nimrod was a mighty hunter. It says also Esau was a mighty hunter. And Esau is actually the one who slayed Nimrod. He killed Nimrod. And he comes running back, and the soldiers are after him, and he comes running back. He's out of breath and tired, and he knows he's not going to survive the day. They're going to kill him. He just killed Nimrod. And his brother was there making some stew. And he said, you know what, just give me some of that stew and I'll give you my birthright. Well, now maybe we can kind of understand why he was willing to give up his birthright to his brother for a bowl of stew. He didn't think he was going to survive the day anyway. But ultimately, the seer that warned Nimrod that through Abram would be his downfall, we find out that Abram's grandson is the one who ended up killing Nimrod. Okay. So anyway, it's kind of some history, and it's where you can understand Genesis a little bit more when you understand some of this backstory, but I'm not going to teach on that. All right. I'm just kind of putting it out there. Okay, guys. I think what we've decided to do, we're going to make these videos about 35 minutes. We're going to try this and see, as we're analyzing our videos, I can see that people are watching part of it, and then they'll go and they'll come back and watch it again, some more of it, and then they'll come back maybe and watch more of it. I know it's hard for people to sit down and just watch a teaching for an hour and a half. So we decided we're going to make these roughly 35 minutes and try this for a little while, see how that works out. So anyway, today, basically, we've got through to the beginning of this covenant, this mystery of the covenant. We've come up to Abraham, okay? And so in the next teaching, we're going to do 2 a week. We'll put one out on Monday, just like we've been doing. And then on Thursday morning, we're going to post another video up. The next video on Thursday morning, we're going to go through, we've come up to Abraham. We're going to go actually to Abram. And we're going to go from Abram to Abraham and then to Isaac. Okay. And then following week on Monday, we're going to take off from there and go from Isaac through to Jacob. And I think I'm going to get it all in one teaching. We'll go from Jacob to Ephraim. And then, once we get to Ephraim, we know that is the house of Israel. And then we'll take that on forward, into Paul and Romans. But anyway, what we can take away from this first teaching, first of all, we've defined the difference between a contract and a covenant. Okay. A contract can be broken and it's voided. A covenant cannot be voided because one party defaults on it. And we know time and time again, it's going to be mankind that defaults on this covenant, never Yahweh. But we know time and time again, he's going to say, but I will remember that covenant. I'm not going to be the one to walk away from it. You walked away from it. And just because mankind walks away from that covenant does not void it. Okay. He will always be standing there waiting for mankind to come back into that covenant. And so as we end this first video, as we trace the sand of the sea through, it's going to appear in Abraham to Isaac, and then from Isaac to Jacob, and Jacob to Ephraim. These stars in the heaven, these sand of the sea to the Goyim, to the Gentile. And we know that Yahweh is standing there waiting with this covenant, waiting for mankind to come back. And so the question is, once we figure out who we are and that Yahweh is standing there waiting for mankind to come back into this covenant, the question is, are you willing to get back into this thing?